Welcome back, everybody, to the David Pakman Show. Luke Beasley here, filling in. Quite the Friday show ahead of us. Let's dive right into it. Vice President Kamala Harris held a joint press conference, delivered remarks with President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. And I will play clips from that. Then notably, what I want to get to is Laura Ingraham on Fox News struggling to respond to the remarks that were delivered and saying something so bonkers, it's going to be hard for you to believe. Let's get to that. But first, for context, here is Vice President Harris with Volodymyr Zelensky.
As I have made clear on our 6 previous meetings and throughout Putin's brutal aggression and war against Ukraine, my support for the people of Ukraine is unwavering. I've been proud to stand with Ukraine. I will continue to stand with Ukraine, and I will work to ensure Ukraine prevails in this war. To be safe, secure, and prosperous, the United States must continue to fulfill our long-standing role of global leadership. We must stand with our allies and our partners. We must defend our democratic values and stand up to aggressors. And we must stand for international order, rules, and norms. Each one of these principles is at stake in Ukraine. And that is why Ukraine's fight matters to the people of America.
Given our understanding of this invasion by Russia into Ukraine, trying to take over sovereign territory by force, you would think that this would be a unifying message from Harris. You'd think that Fox News wouldn't have much to take issue with, but if you've kept up with American politics long enough, you know they'll take issue with absolutely anything. Then just one more clip before getting to that.
Putin started this war, and he could end it tomorrow if he simply withdrew his troops from Ukraine's sovereign territory. Of course, he has demonstrated no intention of doing that. Instead, he continues to assault civilian infrastructure and terrorize the people of Ukraine. In Switzerland in June, along with 90 other nations at the Ukraine Peace Conference, I told you that the United States shares your vision for the end of this war, an end based on the will of the people of Ukraine and the UN Charter, and that we must work with the international community to secure a just and lasting peace. And I told world leaders there, nothing about the end of this war can be decided without Ukraine.
You know, it's interesting. One of the things that MAGA folks have used, one of the terms they've used to constantly, like I said, take issue with anything that Biden has done as it relates to Ukraine, any of the stances that Vice President Harris has articulated on this issue or other foreign policy issues. They'll just say, oh, well, we just want peace. We want peace. They want war. We want peace. But as we saw, and we'll talk about this later in the show, in Trump's press conference at Trump Tower yesterday, it's actually not meaningful to use that term if you don't have any path to it. If you can't explain the details of how you're going to get there in a way that is just, then you're just throwing out a term for throwing out that term's sake. And that's what we see over and over again, where Harris is explaining in supporting Ukraine, we're attempting to show Putin he's not going to be able to accomplish the things that he wants to. His aggression is not going to achieve the goals that he set out to achieve. And so the only thing he can do is agree to a just peace. And we'll talk more about refuting these talking points after checking in on Laura Ingraham's reaction. Think about, if you've been watching my show, Luke Beasley, on YouTube, go subscribe, or David's show, you've seen for months before Harris, years before Harris dropped off, or before Harris became the top of the ticket and Biden dropped off the ticket, Fox News did 24/7 coverage of how Biden is Satan. He's the worst president in the history of our country, as Trump says, even though he's had a pretty successful presidency. And they would lead their viewers to believe there's nobody worse than Joe Biden. But the unthinkable has happened. And that's what you're going to see playing out here. Laura Ingraham now strangely, inconceivably arguing that Biden's a better candidate than Harris. You know that Biden made the right decision if this is what Fox News is saying.
She can read teleprompters, but is this really that convincing?
By the way there, Laura Ingraham's earring going, I don't want to have any part of this, and jumping off her face.
She can read teleprompters, but is this really that convincing? Today she sounded like she was doing her best Liz Cheney. Let's go to war impersonation.
There are some in my country who would instead force Ukraine to give up large parts of its sovereign territory, who would demand that Ukraine accept neutrality. These proposals are the same of those of Putin. They are proposals for surrender, which is dangerous and unacceptable.
Yes, and I found my earring. All right, in other words, if Kamala wins, we're going to war with Russia, period, full stop.
The in other words is doing a lot of heavy lifting there. In other words, she wants to nuke the entire world. That's kind of what she said, right?
If she sat down with an interview with any competent person in 5 minutes, I think he or she could force her into a corner, saying, Madam Vice President, if it's clear that Ukraine has no real chance of prevailing against Putin, as it increasingly looks like, do you intend to escalate the conflict, even if that means putting American soldiers at risk in a war with Russia? Yes or no, ma'am? On all of these issues, she is far worse than Biden. At least Biden had his own views on issues like foreign policy. And remember, he slow-walked the shipment of F-16s over to Zelensky. Her language today, though, was far more bellicose than Biden's ever was. And that's just because she's a puppet of the war caucus. She doesn't care if we go to war with Russia or not. So we'll see where things end up on election night. But right now, it seems the Democrats' trade of Biden for Kamala was a really, really dumb move.
Sure. Go look at the polling shift since Harris became the nominee and try to make that argument. But the graphic they're saying should have stuck with Joe. Can you imagine? Can you imagine Fox News being put in a place where now they're arguing, we want Biden back? And we've seen this. They're sort of taking Trump's lead, which is at rally after rally, he's been complaining that Biden had to drop off the ticket. He's been saying, but people voted for him and we spent so much money lying about him. I mean, campaigning against him. And it's a very strange thing to do when you only have mere days to the election. Maybe, I hate to give you advice, but maybe strategically it'd be better for you to focus on running against the person that you're running against instead of wishing that you were running against someone different. But of course, when she says that Harris is speaking way more aggressively about Ukraine, the language is nearly identical to that of Biden's on Ukraine because it's the correct stance that she's explaining. And the desperation is just oozing out of these segments as she fabricates her own version of reality. The lower third Chiron said, Kamala the Warhawk. If you think us not involving ourselves militarily, but giving aid to Ukraine so they can defend themselves, so that Russia doesn't think it can keep aggressing and keep preventing peace, is a stance of a war hawk, I think you're misusing that term to say the least. And of course, what is Laura Ingraham's stance then? They act like there's some solid, just peace deal on the table between Russia and Ukraine when, yeah, Putin will have peace if it means he gets handed everything he wants. And then whatever line is drawn, all right, you get this territory or this territory, or this territory. Putin has shown he won't stop there. That's the history of the last couple decades. So all you're saying is you want a moment of peace, a loss of sovereignty, a loss of territory, just so we can go through all of this again. Instead of putting a stop to this, showing Putin, you can't aggress. Sorry, you can't do it. No longer. That's the path to lasting peace, despite Laura Ingraham trying to portray Vice President Harris as a war hawk, even though when she says, I bet Harris couldn't answer a question about, are you going to involve U.S. soldiers in direct conflict with Russia? I bet Harris could never answer such a question. Yeah, she can. She has. Biden has. The administration's stance hasn't changed on that. We're not getting into direct military conflict with Russia. Here's just a little bit more when she brings on Kevin McCarthy, which, what are you doing, Kevin? No one wants to hear from you anymore.
Well, again, it seems to me that this was such a big, risky move to dump Biden. But they thought they were being really clever and really smart. But the metrics that we just went through a few of them tonight. We'll see what happens on election night. But this is, if they think this was some big slam dunk, this three-dimensional chess, I am not seeing it. I think Biden would have been a much better candidate. Mr. Speaker, yes or no?
Oh, exactly, yes. He showed that he was a better candidate.
Think about how much Vice President Harris's candidacy has broken the brains of Trump, who keeps ranting about, no one leaves my crowds, no one leaves my crowds, no one leaves my crowds. I promise everyone loves me, everyone loves me. He can't get off of that. He clearly, the debate and on, has had his brain broken by Harris. Not to mention even before saying that she turned black and all that crazy stuff. Then Fox host Kevin McCarthy here, all being impacted so severely mentally by Harris's candidacy and her momentum that they're put in a place where they're going on TV and arguing that the guy they said was the worst, most incompetent, terrible, satanic person ever was a better candidate. And it's not just that. I've covered over on my show, Laura Ingraham getting mad at Harris for hugging people, for smiling, and for laughing. When you start arguing against joy, laughter, one person on a Fox News panel literally said, I'm annoyed that Harris keeps using the term joy. You've taken a wrong turn somewhere, and I can't exactly help you out with that. But all of this, them doing the unthinkable, arguing in favor of Biden all of a sudden after years of saying he's the worst, is just a sign that this was the right decision. Otherwise, they wouldn't be panicking over it. And you also had in the same monologue this point.
Adams may be guilty, may not be guilty. That's up for a jury to decide. But the fact that so many are questioning the government's motives here is itself an indictment of the Biden-Harris administration.
So now you have MAGA arguing that the indictment of a Democratic mayor for corruption charges, campaign finance violations, getting money from foreign sources, allegedly, that may have been an example of the weaponized DOJ. But everyone, hold your horses. Didn't you say the proof of the weaponization was that only Republicans were targeted? But then you had Bob Menendez, you had Hunter Biden, now you have Eric Adams, who are all Democrats. And you're saying, no, but see, it's still because of reasons. Trump at his press conference said because Eric Adams said something that was not to Biden's liking on immigration. If you have to bend yourself into that many pretzels to defend your stance, you might just have the wrong stance. And since we're talking about Harris's laying out of specifics and being clear on her stance on Ukraine, at this press conference I've referenced now a couple times, Trump was much more vague.
Situation.
Do you believe that Ukraine should turn over some of its own land to Russia in order to end the war?
We'll see what happens.
And again, we'll dive more into his responses on things like that in a different segment. Much more after a quick break.
Follow us on social media. Interact with the David Pakman Show community. See exclusive content. See when we're taking calls live. And stay up to date on other big show announcements. We post daily. Find us on Reddit, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, and TikTok.
Luke Beasley filling in for David today. You can find me at Luke Beasley on YouTube. Mark Cuban, the billionaire known for his presence on Shark Tank, is ruthlessly and accurately crushing Trump on a daily basis on different networks. Let me walk you through some recent examples, starting here on CNBC.
And the question is, here we are talking about policy, right? We're having real policy
Right,
conversation.
the underpinning is the guy
But
didn't
my,
live
no,
up
but
to
my
his oath.
question is how much do you think as CEOs who are watching this program, or just a voter, is supposed to think about these other issues?
Look,
I think that Joe would say that January 6th is not
It's
something...
been litigated. People know it happened. It's been litigated. The 48% that back him are...
When, I mean, the guy literally told his vice president, he called him,
No.
You know what he called him, right? He literally tried to get him to overturn an election. That should disqualify him. It just, for whatever reason, people don't want it.
In the heat of that moment, at that point, I think he really did believe that it had been stolen at that point. I don't know if he believes it anymore.
Look, I remember going to...
But you know that in the past, there have been Democrats that have voted not to certify.
Yeah, that's fine.
Many
right?
times.
That's fine. But
Previous elections.
none of them called their vice president a pussy and said, don't certify the election, right? None of them have.
Right.
He's the only one to do that.
As I said, you got Stormy Daniels. There's a lot of things.
I don't care about his character, right? I don't care about what he does in his personal life. Right. I could care less. But you have to live up to your oath of office as president of the United States. You cannot trust that Donald Trump would do that. You talk about history. He has ripped off more hardworking Americans than probably anybody else. Michael, down the street, right? When Michael Cohen said he was instructed to short pay and that was a good thing, at the end of the day, when Donald Trump stood up there talking about...
And I'll stop that one, but there's much more to watch. A lot there. My regular viewers over on my channel know that I have a hard time not getting into a really aggressive, very long rant. So I'll try to minimize it whenever people's attempt to reduce January 6th to minimize the significance of it and what led up to it is espoused. It drives me crazy. And so first, saying I think in the heat of the moment, as the Joe Kernan CNBC host said, I think that point he really did believe that it had been stolen, is what he said. Oh, great. Well, then why do this whole democracy thing? Oh, if he believes it, then just let him stay in office. What the heck? Who cares about 81 million people's say? No. Just because a narcissist who can't accept that he lost an election convinces himself, if that's what you believe, even though I don't believe that, but let's say that we believe that, convinces himself that he actually won because his fees can't handle the truth, that doesn't mean we throw out our entire constitutional system. And that doesn't mean that next time he tries to become president again, we don't remember how he tried to prevent the peaceful transfer of power. And when talking about January 6th, people sometimes try to reduce that to just a riot. It was just a riot. Riots happened. That was a riot. Okay, that one happened to be at the Capitol. Remember, the devastation on the day, yes. And the reason why that happened, that being the culmination of lies that Trump was telling. He was using those very same lies to justify, as Cuban pointed out, trying to get his vice president to collect and then count fraudulent electors that weren't sent lawfully, that were just random MAGA people saying, I'm an elector. Oh, look, I signed a form. Fraudulently get his vice president to instead assert those as the lawful ones when they weren't. That would have just stopped our constitutional process in a way that would have thrown us into a constitutional crisis. Luckily, Pence said no. But the fact that people wave that off, let's talk about the real issues. I don't really care about this whole democracy thing. It drives me absolutely bonkers. Here is now Cuban on Fox News delivering the message right to Trump.
He argues is that hers are fewer and not as devastating as the president's. Mark Cuban agrees with her, the billionaire businessman, joining us right now. Mark, you argue that, and it's always good to have you, you argue that Donald Trump's are particularly, I think you used the word insane. What did you mean by that?
Yep. Well, first of all, strategic tariffs aren't bad. So if a company's trying to dump, or a country's trying to dump in the United States and we have a manufacturer there, tariff them, that's great. But across the board tariffs, 10 or 20% is just inflationary. It's a tax on the American consumer. But to make matters even worse, and what's truly insane, when you threaten a legendary company like John Deere with a 200% tariff if they move, but only a 10 or 20% tariff on China, what you're doing is you're making it easy for the Chinese competitors to take business away from John Deere. That is the definition of insane.
A lot of your business colleagues say the definition of insane is supporting Kamala Harris. Yet you do. You're a smart, savvy businessman. You came from nothing to be a multi-billionaire. So you're pretty good at what you do. What do you see in her that you don't see in Donald Trump?
I think she's thorough. If you look at Donald, right, when he talks about his policies, they're very impetuous, they're impulsive, they're set to match whatever's happening at a rally. Whereas with the Harris campaign and Kamala herself, she's very, very thorough. She's very precise. Her team really vets every idea. And to me, that's important as a business person because you can trust what she says. Think about what happens when Donald comes out and says, I'm going to put a 10% cap on credit card interest rates. The next thing that happens isn't that he explains why, it's that everybody around him explains what he says. He can't explain it for himself. Everybody's got to explain for him.
It's an excellent point, and Harris is actually able to explain her own policies. And what's interesting is a big line of criticism from MAGA of Vice President Kamala Harris has been that she can't answer questions, even though she does more and more interviews lately and is getting better and better at specifically laying out her policy proposals in a way that Trump never could. They take issue with her when she'll sometimes, as I know David covered, sound a little bit circular and a little bit vague. They'll say that's proof that she can't answer any questions, even if the other hour of the event she was. But they don't take issue with Trump every single time he's asked a question. He just rants about people coming from insane asylums and talks about how he's going to tariff this and that. He's going to tariff your dog. He's going to tariff the neighbor. He just tariff. And then he talks about how energy production's down even though it's up and how crime's up even though it's down. And then he gets asked about childcare and just, I don't even know how I could summarize that blob of words. MAGA doesn't take issue with that. Because in reality, that contrast is very much laid bare. That Cuban's pointing out, that it actually takes Trump's allies to come out and say, well, I think what he meant by 200% tariff on John Deere was that actually we're going to help John Deere do good, better, make America great again. Harris can just explain her own policy proposals, doesn't need assists from all of her surrogates in explaining, well, I think what the vice president meant is actually something really rational, even though it sounded crazy. Here's more.
Either. All we've seen Donald Trump do is hire his relatives, right? RNC, here comes the daughter-in-law. Who's going to speak for him? His two sons. Want to come up with a new Hey, we got a new silver coin. Here come the sons. Hey, we got blockchain. We've got DeFi. Here comes another son. You haven't seen him work with, again, the family business is now the Republican Party.
Yeah. Again, I know calling out hypocrisy can be a waste of time because people don't seem to react to it properly. But under Biden was their obsession for so long. They pushed a lot of falsehoods and then had those ideas bolstered by what was a troubled life of Hunter's. They say it's just so horrible that Hunter could have benefited from his last name. And then they don't care at all when governments funnel money through Trump's businesses to Trump, foreign governments, that is, when it's become a family business, when Ivanka and Jared Kushner are in the administration, then going on to get business deals because they were in the administration. Come on. The least we should be able to expect, even if we disagree, is logical consistency, right? Just be consistent. Apply your standards equally, but they never do. And great point here by Mark Cuban, the misunderstanding of what is mainstream media plays into the sort of victimhood mindset of MAGA when it's not justified.
The Elon quote, and I don't know what you think of Elon, but
I like Elon.
I like Elon too, but she was at 28% favorability,
right.
And then, as you say, things change. She's all the way up to about 50%. I would just argue that filling in the blanks does not account for that move, and that the media coverage has been so positive and almost, Mark, that it's like, we don't have to worry about trying to elect this guy who is clearly not up for another 4 years. And it's not Donald Trump. So they would have, the left and the people that need a candidate would have embraced anyone at that point. And, you know, ABC, it was 100% positive coverage of her, 92% negative of Trump. So Elon says,
So
what changed the media coverage?
Okay, first, what's the most watched news channel? Who are the most watched and viewed and listened to podcasts? Who are the most watched and listened to or
Is it
viewed?
Fox?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
I mean, it's not close, right? The number one shows are all Fox. The number one podcast,
So
lean right.
even in spite of that, she's been able to.
Not in spite of that, meaning, well, in spite of that, meaning the mainstream media is not who you think it is. The mainstream media truly leans right.
Maybe that's why it's only tied then.
Well, maybe, right?
I really like that sort of half turtleneck thing that Mark Cuban has going on too, which is very important for you to know. So there's this constant, again, I use victimhood mindset within MAGA, this sort of everyone's against us. The elections are rigged. The courts are rigged. Prosecutors are rigged. The media is rigged. And that allows for misinformation and for falsehoods to become so much more popularized in these MAGA spaces, because you can wave away all the things that prove those ideas wrong by saying, oh yeah, but all of our institutions, all of the prominent media outlets, they're all just too biased to be trusted. And that's what allows Trump to get away with so many of his foundational beliefs. But what they never seem to acknowledge is the most influential media outlets, so many of them are right-wing. And so you constantly complain about how, oh, ABC does too negative coverage of Trump. You never complain that there's never a negative story about Trump on Fox News, the bigger outlet, the more prominent outlet. There's never a positive story about Vice President Kamala Harris. Again, an example of hypocrisy, but then it gets to, okay, well, then are both the same? No. Because one of the things they take issue with is ABC in the debate fact-checking Trump more than they fact-checked Harris. Well, on the Fox News side, they'll quote-unquote fact-check Harris with lies. They won't be factual in their fact-checks, which makes them a less credible institution. ABC fact-checks Trump more in the debate because he told more quick, simple to debunk, outright, explicit lies. Like, I won the election when he didn't. Or like, Haitians are eating. It pads that lie as well. And Harris wasn't telling a bunch of lies like that. There were moments where you could add context, or, oh, Trump might say that part wasn't, she misrepresented it, but yeah, technically it's not a lie. But that's not the job of moderators, as they point out, because if they corrected Trump every time he misrepresented something, he'd never get you get one word and you have to correct him. And so no, it's not that all the media is biased against the right wing. Actually, there are these double standards in the media because they're accused of being too liberal. The liberal mainstream media actually bends over backwards. The example I always use is to appear neutral instead of just being objective. And so if there's 10 crazy things Trump does, they'll do 10 stories about it. If there's one slightly negative thing Harris does, they'll do 10 stories about it to show, look, oh. And that's not how the media is supposed to operate. And the media landscape actually becomes that much more wonky when you add to that double standard and that flawed coverage the most prominent media, which is right-wing, often overt propaganda. And so the victimhood status that many MAGA people identify with, oh, the media is so against us, is actually not based in fact. Speaking of MAGA media, this is really interesting. Newsmax host Greta Van Susteren brought on Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders. And Bernie Sanders won over the heart and the mind of this Newsmax host. Newsmax is identified as more right-wing, more crazy MAGA than Fox News is. And Bernie was able to have a really thoughtful discussion and say, hey, even if you think I'm the epitome of communism or whatever. I'm trying to do, and Biden has tried to do, some things that lower prescription drug costs that maybe we can all agree on. This is super fascinating.
Download Research, you have been fighting for fair drug prices since you were in Congress. 25 years ago, you introduced your first act, the Prescription Drug Fairness for Citizens Act, 1999. What is the problem that now the drug prices are still catastrophically high compared to other countries?
Absolutely. We are paying by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs, as you may or may not know. If you've done some research, I've taken trips of Americans over the Canadian border, where in some cases we have bought the same exact product for 1/10 of the price in Canada compared to the United States. And in fact, prices around the world are even less expensive than in Canada. So we're getting ripped off, and our goal now is to take on the pharmaceutical industry and very simply tell them, hey, don't charge us prices in America that are higher than the people in other countries.
Well, you've been quite a warrior for the drug industry. I mean, that's no secret. You've introduced a number of acts on this, but you've got sort of an uphill battle. Last year, and according to my research, the big pharma spent $379 million on lobbying. So you've got sort of a heavy lift with some of your colleagues.
They are, next to Wall Street, the most powerful political force in the country. Believe it or not, and this is true, they have 1,800 well-paid lobbyists here in Washington to make sure the Democrats and Republicans do nothing to protect the American people. Now, the good news is we have made a little bit of progress, some progress in the last few years. If you are on insulin right now and you're a senior, you will not be paying more than $35 a month. We've worked hard on that issue. If you have asthma and you use an inhaler, we are moving now 2 out of the major 4 companies are not charging the hundreds of dollars they used to charge for the inhalers, but $35. The major one by the end of the year will also reduce their prices. If you are a senior, no matter how many ailments you have, and no matter how many prescription drugs you take, you will not be paying more than $2,000 out of pocket. So those are good steps forward. It ain't enough.
And I'll stop it there, but really interesting to see him going on such a right-wing outlet that perceives him to be the enemy and laying out some uncontroversial facts, or at least facts that should be in a rational political dialogue. So here from the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation, you have just bolstering what he said. In 2022, U.S. prices across all drugs, brands, and generics were nearly 2.78 times as high as prices in the comparison countries. U.S. prices for brand drugs were at least 3.22 times as high as prices in the comparison countries, even after adjustments for estimated U.S. rebates. So one of the things that is so irritating about dealing with the extreme MAGA Republican ideology that often doesn't even want to agree on funding the government, doesn't agree on if winners of elections should become the person who's in office, don't believe in some of the basic principles of our system, is that has to become our focus. It has to be our priority. And what that does is it pushes to the side other pressing issues, at least in our dialogues, even if some things are still getting done on them, and pushes those down the road as things that we'll be talking about and debating about and coming up with the best solutions on. Because when Marjorie Taylor Greene is out there screaming about how the election was stolen, we're not going to sit down with the Marjorie Taylor Greenes of the world and have thoughtful discussions about how we lower prescription drug costs. And so it distracts from, even if we should be distracted by it because it's so pressing and it's so foundational, but it does pull us away from other issues that need to be solved. And that's the reason why Harris winning in November isn't just about us getting away from avoiding a complete democratic crisis as we could see under Trump. That's number one priority, but also hopefully then seeing real achievements, many of which or achievements, we saw some of them, some pretty significant ones in the last few years. And Bernie mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act, seniors specifically being helped with their prescription drug costs, Medicare being able to negotiate drug prices. We've heard reporting on that starting with the 10 big drugs, capping the cost of insulin at $35 out of pocket per month. Then Bernie mentioned the $2,000 cap out of pocket per year for all prescription drugs for seniors. The only thing I take issue with in Bernie's appearance on Newsmax, unless I missed this, is, and he does this well, which is to present a friendly vibe. Right? Hey, and if you hear a hammering, there's hammering. I've mentioned to the viewers on my show, the construction's been going on in the building right over for so long, it's driving me crazy, but we charge forward. I wish that Bernie, even though being friendly and not attacking the host, not attacking Republicans, maybe wins over more of the Newsmax viewers, or at least brings this issue to their mind, but I wish he had said, hey, there's a problem in my party too, but your party has the worst problem with blocking progress on this issue. An example is, I just told you about the Inflation Reduction Act. Greta. We could have seen many of those things, like the cap on insulin, applied to all Americans if it weren't for Republicans and some conservative Democrats blocking that from being expanded. We could see some of the things that seniors are going to be benefiting from for all Americans, lowering costs, taking off some of that burden, if it weren't for primarily Republicans blocking progress on the issue. Republicans want to get rid of altogether, they've said, the Inflation Reduction Act. And yes, there are problems with Democrats succumbing to the pressure of Big Pharma. Absolutely, obviously. Your party has the worst problem, though. At least many of us are willing to get something done. Republicans so often are not. And if he had delivered that to the Newsmax audience, that would have been pretty interesting, because it's the Newsmax infrastructure that day after day pushes pro-Republican, pro-MAGA propaganda, when the very problems that are being discussed, at least in that segment, are exacerbated by the lack of progress being made because of primarily Republicans. We have much more. Again, Luke Beasley on YouTube if you want to find my show after this quick break.
If you value what we do at the David Pakman Show, remember to support us on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/David Pakman Show, where you can get access to behind the scenes videos, the daily bonus show, the commercial-free daily show, as well as special discounts on merch, including hats, hoodies, mugs, and t-shirts. You can support the show for as little as $2 a month. Check it out at patreon.com/David Pakman Show.
You know, David has discussed the bizarre political phenomenon, which is that you have this guy Trump who's running for president. I don't know if you've heard. And his wife, Melania, just never seems to want to be around him. It's very strange, very notable. And to try to address some of those criticisms, Melania Trump did finally come out of hiding and make a public appearance. This was in an interview with Fox and Friends. And one moment went very viral. She did not intend for it to, but it backfired badly. Okay, so we'll get to that. First, let me just give you a couple context clips of sort of the vibe of this interview. You have her saying this.
So I think American people need to decide what they really want. Maybe some, strong tweets, but everything else great for this country. So it's all in the American people's hands on November 5th.
I did talk about on my show. And so for viewers who watch both, I don't want to just rehash the entire rant. How much it triggers me when people reduce the criticism of Trump to, he has some aggressive tweets. Okay, we can deal with that. That's not the problem. You remember when he left the whole country in shambles, that whole thing? You remember that? Democracy hanging in the balance. Pandemic mismanaged. Economic crisis mismanaged. Crime spike mismanaged. And then Biden-Harris had to sort of fix all those problems. Maybe look there for some indications of why we don't like it, why we don't support him. And maybe, do you remember that time when he sent that post on Truth Social? He said, a massive fraud of this type magnitude allows for the termination of all rules, regulations, and articles, even those found in the Constitution. That's weird. That's not something I want in a precedent. Oh, but it's just mean tweets. That's all. That's all we care about. So irritating. Here's more.
How did you feel about Donald Trump running again?
I support him. I know how passionate he is to make America great again.
We saw you backstage at the RNC. Do you want to talk about why you decided not to come out on stage and give a speech like you did in 2016?
It was my decision. I think was just the time. I think was the right time. In days before, I wrote a beautiful letter to America.
Yes.
And I think in one way that letter was my speech.
The raid on, how did you?
And then they get into the raid on Mar-a-Lago that Melania says was show violating and terrible. And can you get that? They went into my room and they searched it because they had a search warrant. That's what a search warrant does, Melania. It allows you to search even your room. Yep, that's it. The way they cry foul about that really also gets under my skin. But then we get to the part that went viral. Melania Trump said, Donald Trump, or she was asked, what is something you wish Americans could know about your husband that they don't? Which is funny. Melania assumes what she's about to say is something they don't know, that America doesn't know about Trump. But she says, Trump's just such a family man, you know? And this led to, and this is on the Midas Touch network, Michael Cohen pointing out, I don't know if that's the correct term for Donald Trump.
How do you feel when people say they don't like him? What do you wish they knew about him?
That he's really a family man. He loves his family.
Yes, he's such a family man, Cohen, that he has a bunch of different families.
Oh, right. See, he's a major and a tremendous family man. Let's just break this down. If you read my book, Disloyal, you'll see at least a half a dozen different scenarios where he literally says some of the worst shit about Don Jr. that you could ever imagine. That he is the worst fucking judgment of, and these aren't my words, these are Donald's words, that Don Jr. has the worst fucking judgment of anyone he's ever met in his life. Ivanka he wants to sleep with. Eric, he really doesn't say anything other than Eric has his spatial understanding, right? All three of these kids, by the way, were not raised by Donald. They were really raised by their mom, but more even than that, they were raised by a guy named Vinny, who was their driver. And I'll never forget when Donald wanted to fire Vinny, they all stepped up and they said, if you do, we're actually leaving. It's the one thing that we will not let you do. He was more of a father to them than their own father. Tiffany, the redheaded stepchild that nobody even knew from. I mean, if I can tell you stories till tomorrow about, she would call, he'd roll his eyes. And I feel bad because I actually happen to know and like Tiffany. And then, of course, there's Barron. Barron has seen less of Donald than any of the other four children, which is hard to believe as it relates even to Tiffany. So, yeah, he's a family man. While Melania just has a child, he's out there sleeping with a porn star and a Playboy playmate. Absolutely the best father. He deserves the Time Magazine Father of the Year award.
Yeah, so those are allegations from Michael Cohen, but they're backed up by Trump's record more broadly. Things that have been proven, even in courts of law, like the porn star remark, like Trump being found liable for sexually abusing E. Jean Carroll. And this is a part of a broader gaslighting effort by MAGA to convince us of something that surely they don't even think is true. I know some of them do believe that Trump is a family man, because I've talked to them and they looked in my eyes and they said, I love him because he loves his family so much. But that's more your hardcore cultist. But the other people who go, oh, you know, he's a Christian man, it more feels like they're just showing, see, I'll say what needs to be said to demonstrate my love of Trump. Because you watch his life, the story of his life is of someone who could not give one single, you know what, about family. Someone who does not treat people like a family man would. And so for Melania to say that, yes, it led to a humiliating trend where one example after another was being posted on social media of him being the opposite of that. But it's also her doing the same sort of MAGA virtue signaling, which is, we all know this isn't really true. Again, I'm assuming they know that. Otherwise, yikes. Either that term means something very different to you than it really means, or you're really detached from reality. So I'm going to assume you're intelligent and you know that's not true. So then you're just showing your fellow MAGA people, see, we all pretend like this. We all pretend this is true. And why that would be the term she uses, when one of the reasons she didn't want to show up to Trump's criminal trial in Manhattan is because she didn't want to hear about how he slept with the porn star, because she knows it's true. She didn't want to hear about how Stormy Daniels spanked Trump with a magazine with his face on it. She didn't want to hear those things. Why? Because it reminds her of how much of an anti-family man Donald Trump is. David showed you yesterday a woman by the name of Roseanne Barr at a Tucker Carlson event. A little snippet he showed you. Because she is publicly unraveling in a way that's very concerning and is one of the most aggressive supporters of Trump, but then also conspiracy theorists. And I'll remind you of the clip he played for you. Then I'm going to show you a different part of this event where she goes full QAnon. And Tucker Carlson doesn't really know what to do with himself and is uncomfortable. So here's what he already showed you. Then we'll look at the new clip.
They overthrew the constitutional republic of the United States of America. And then they covered it up with their January 6th bullshit. With their insurrection. Because the first thing President Trump did, God bless him.
Oh, gosh. I don't know why even Tucker Carlson would want to let her do that. Meaning giving her a platform to demonstrate just how unhinged, unwell, maybe, she is. I saw someone say, shame on the crowd, shame on Tucker Carlson for enabling this sort of behavior and pretending like it's not indicative of just a really, really scary approach to politics that she has. Approach to reality that she has, honestly. But here's the part that we haven't yet talked about.
You know they eat babies. That is not bullshit. It's true.
So it's not just the dogs and the cats, not just the pets.
It's not just the dogs and the cats. They're full-on vampires. And everybody still thinks I'm crazy, but I'm not crazy. They're full-on vampires. They love the taste of human flesh.
Oh, she's talking about Democrats, by the way. I think you assume that. And just for the YouTube algorithm, sometimes when this crazy stuff is being said, it flags it. This is bad and wrong, and we're showing for the sake of informing people on the terribleness, detached from reality-ness of this, okay? So one thing before playing more, because you can't listen to all this at once, it's just, you'll end up feeling some brain pain if you do. She is being dead serious. I've watched hours, unfortunately, in preparation for segments we've done of her podcast. This is her real belief. This is not humor. This is not satire. She is a MAGA comedian, but her form of comedy now is just sort of being crazy, and people laugh because they think that she's in on the joke, but she's not. And so she genuinely believes all this. She's had dead serious conversations about it. What is really irritating is the crowd's going, yeah, this is so awesome, thinking it's sort of humorous. And Tucker is laughing, and then eventually his face gets straight, and he's just dead silent throughout this. And then she starts praying and weaving in some of this stuff. It's just all as serious as it gets, but they try to make light of it so they don't have to interface with the stress that comes of realizing, oh, this is an adult person who genuinely cannot decipher fact from fiction. Oh, no.
And they drink human blood. They do tell. By the time we go in to vote for Trump,
So now she's praying about this.
He will open up everybody's eyes and they will stop pretending to be asleep. You know what they say? You can't wake people up that are pretending to be asleep, but I pray to God, please wake up even those who are pretending to be asleep with the irrefutable truth of what the worst people on this planet are really up to. They are really up to that. They're doing it. There are so many victims. There are so many victims. There's so...
You know, Jaden, if you could show the split screen, this proves that the look that Tucker, I'll describe for our podcast listeners, you know that look where he sort of furrows his brow and he looks really, really fascinated with what's being said. It proves that's a meaningless look. Because if you make that face, oh, Roseanne, interesting. Let me actually take notes on what you're saying. This is so fascinating. If that's a look he uses on even this, then that just means that's always the face he puts on when he acts like he's listening. Because this is not oh my gosh, she's really revealing something to us today. And just as a flashback, every time we talk about Roseanne Barr, obviously what she's saying is absolutely insane and concerning that, again, an adult celebrity or any adult would fall for and fall down such a disturbing social media rabbit hole. And when we talk about her on a more lighthearted note, I find this clip from her speech a couple years ago at the Turning Point USA event so delightful because of how the crowd just immediately goes, oh wait, this is too crazy even for us.
If we don't stop these horrible communists, do you hear me? I'm asking you to hear me. Stalinist, communists, with a huge helping of Nazi fascists thrown in, plus wanting a caliphate.
I don't know why they cheered for every one of her crazy terms other than that, and they go, all right, now we're out. That's you crossed the line, Roseanne.
Plus wanting a caliphate. To replace every Christian democracy on earth now occupied. Do you know that?
Yeah, apparently they don't know that because no reaction on that one either. So, I think this is what happens when you celebrate anyone who will say they hate the opposition. If you say you're against Kamala, if you say you're against Biden, you hate the libs, we're going to take down woke, then it doesn't matter how far you go in the other direction. This MAGA world, Tucker Carlson, who's smart enough to understand, as dishonest as he is, this stuff is ridiculous. But they embrace it. So then you have the people who think they're in on some joke. Oh yeah, no, but she's making a point with hyperbole. And I interviewed, you've heard a lot about Laura Loomer recently. I interviewed some time ago Laura Loomer and asked her about Trump's termination of the Constitution post. And she said, no, he's making a point about how we have to strengthen the Constitution because it's the Democrats who tried to terminate it. What? That doesn't make sense. And so I think a lot of them go, no, they're using hyperbole strategically to make a point. Not that they're drinking babies, but that they don't support increasing the fertility rate. And meanwhile, the non-in on the joke people are falling for the stuff. But more people are hearing about this crazy stuff because it's being platformed by people who know better. And shame on them for that. We'll be back after this.
Make sure to visit the David Pakman Show website. This is the central clearinghouse for all things Pakman. Whether you want to listen to the latest podcast or drop the podcast feed into your podcast app, see the latest YouTube videos, find a list of our esteemed guests dating all the way back to the beginning of time as far as the David Pakman Show is concerned. If you want to take part in the world famous and award-winning bonus show, yes, awards we give out, but awards nonetheless, you can sign up for membership at joinpakman.com. Coupon codes always available, never mandatory. And of course, you can also get on the daily newsletter at davidpakman.com. Be notified about new shows and so many other things. Looking for us on social media? Trying to find the YouTube channel? Wanting to make a suggestion about who we should have on the show? Do it all at davidpakman.com.
Welcome back to the show. Luke Beasley here, filling in for David. You can find me at Luke Beasley on YouTube. It's a great time. Why aren't you there already? Come on, go subscribe. But Trump held quite the insane press conference yesterday at Trump Tower. And we're going to actually start at the end, and then I'll go show you other clips. He gets asked one particular question that causes him to conveniently forget absolutely everything. Just empty out his brain and go, I don't know anything. I don't know what you're talking about. And that is on the subject of Mark Robinson. I know David has broken down this insane story for you, but Mark Robinson, a person that Trump described as Martin Luther King on steroids ×2, someone who Trump has been so complimentary of, well, it was discovered that as he was chatting it up on a porn site, Nude Africa, I think it was called, Mark Robinson described himself as a black Nazi, talked about how he wanted slavery to come back, reflected on memories of himself as a 14-year-old watching the female shower room, locker room as people were showering, and super publicly anti-trans, but talked about how he liked trans porn, as well as discussing a bunch of other stuff that would be too vulgar for this professional format. So that guy is now being run away from by a lot of Republicans and North Carolina gubernatorial candidate. Trump gets asked about him. He knows very well what has happened, but conveniently, his brain is empty when he gets asked this.
Are you going to pull your endorsement of Mark Robinson?
I don't know the situation.
Do you believe that you...
I don't know the situation. Yeah, you do. You do. You do. And we know you do. This is not convincing anyone. But it's notable, despite him trying to act as if I don't know anything about the situation. Who knows? It is notable that he's not denouncing Robinson. He should be judged for not denouncing and revoking his endorsement. So where things stand now, even if he's saying, I don't know the situation, he's not affirmatively saying, no, I'm still for Robinson. But when you endorse someone, until you announce you've revoked your endorsement, you've still endorsed them. So Trump is still someone who's endorsed a quote-unquote black Nazi. Other moments from this, he wasn't more clear on details at much of the press conference, as you'll see here when asked about Gaza.
Okay.
Leaders yesterday at the UN General Assembly came together to call for an immediate ceasefire. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is speaking at the UN tomorrow. He has refused to do that. What would you do differently to prevent the Middle East?
Well, you have to have that ended one way or the other. The world isn't going to take it. You have to have that ended, and I would think that we're getting close to a point where maybe it can end pretty soon.
That provides no insights to anyone about anything. His political goal on so many issues is to be vague enough or specifically contradictory enough, throw out enough issues, or just never really state a clear stance, such that it's hard for people to determine, all right, I definitely know this is his stance and I definitely disagree with it. And it's a very dishonest way to go about politics. Very similar answer on Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
I believe I will be able to make a deal between President Putin and President Zelensky quite quickly.
But what does that look like? What does that look like? What does that?
I don't want to tell you what that looks like.
I don't want to tell you what that looks like. That's sort of what you do when you're running for an office. You kind of you say what you do, and then we decide, do we want to elect you to do that or not? But all Trump can say is this never would have happened, that never would have happened, this never would have happened, that never would have happened, never explaining what he would have done differently to actually facilitate such a situation where that doesn't happen if he were president. And he can never explain specifics on how he'd bring any conflict to a resolution. So when MAGA says, I want Trump because he'll prevent war, he'll stop war, hey, how about you wait to hold such a stance until he gives you reason to? Until he explains what he'd do to bring things to a peaceful resolution. Then he once again calls for one of his political opponents to be prosecuted.
And Nancy Pelosi has a little problem because her husband sold their Visa stock. They had a lot of Visa stock one day before Visa was announced that Visa is being sued by the Department of Justice. Think of that. Nancy Pelosi sold vast amounts of Visa stock one day before the big lawsuit that we all read about a few days ago was brought against Visa. You think it was luck? I don't think. She should be prosecuted. Nancy Pelosi should be prosecuted for that. And she should also be prosecuted for J6 because she turned down 10,000 or any number she wanted, soldiers or National Guard. And I hope you all read John Solomon. And
no, we didn't. So lie. I will specify on the Visa thing, I think it was like 2 months before, and it was her husband. And thus far, we don't have evidence of illegality. But if Trump wants to come out in support of a congressional stock trading ban, okay. Many Democrats support that. But no. He's just focused on Nancy Pelosi being put in jail because he doesn't like her. And that's shown by him then pushing conspiracy theories to justify jailing her about January 6th. Deranged stuff. Then, as I told you earlier in the show, there's this weird MAGA defense going on of Eric Adams, the Democratic mayor of New York, who was indicted on corruption charges, getting money from foreign sources, campaign finance violations, and now, so that they can stick with the DOJ is rigged, they're saying it's even maybe weaponized against a Democrat. What?
I don't know. I don't know the mayor well, but he's been fairly generous to me in his statements for a while. I thought you had the worst mayor ever that we had prior to him. I will say this. I watched about a year ago when he talked about how the illegal migrants are hurting our city and the federal government should pay us and we shouldn't have to take them. And I said, you know what? He'll be indicted within a year. And I was exactly right, because that's what we...
So I do need to come clean with y'all in case any of you see something on my jacket. I just tried to take a drink of water while I was off camera, and the cap was still on, but it was unscrewed, and I spilled on myself. So know that. I see it too. I'm sorry. And I got distracted by what he was saying and didn't focus on drinking my water. But he is doing what we've seen Laura Ingraham and others do, which is maybe the DOJ was weaponized against Republicans and now weaponized against Democrats too. It's weaponized against everyone. There's a two-tier justice system, but two tiers meaning both tiers are treated the same. No. Sorry. No. I'm not even going to explain why no, because you have the burden of proof and you haven't brought forward a shred of proof that now this is also weaponized against Eric Adams. No. Then on his meeting coming up today with Zelensky,
President Zelensky said that you do not understand what it takes to win this war.
Oh, then I should immediately cancel my appointment. No, he knows. He knows I understand. Look. I hate to see the carnage. If I were president, it never would have happened.
We all hate to see the carnage. We all would like to see a just and peaceful resolution. It's Vice President Kamala Harris who's actually explaining how she sees that going, which is our support of Ukraine eventually discouraging Putin from continuing. You're the one who talks about the carnage, as we all do, without actually working one single second of your life to come up with a plan for a solution. Saying it never would have happened is not a solution. He did rant over and over again, as he's doing constantly, lying about Harris, saying that she's lying about McDonald's.
These people are a fraud. Just like nobody talks about it, but Kamala never had a job at McDonald's. Her resume talks about McDonald's. When I worked at the French fry counter, it was so tough, so hot. She didn't work there. She never worked at McDonald's. It was a lie. These people...
I don't know why he's so obsessed with this. First of all, it's not a lie. Second of all, why is this the thing you're so fixated on? And it just goes on and on. I don't know if you need to... He ranted for about 30 minutes about the border. You've heard all of that before. I don't think it's really justified to just give him that platform over and over again to lie. He brought up Springfield. He brought up Colorado. All the things you've heard before. Then in saying that this is a purposeful plan, immigration plot, sort of the great replacement theory type stuff, he pushes this.
Their policies are so wrong and so evil and so unfair. And there's only 3 reasons they want to do that. Number 1, they're incompetent. And I'm not sure that that's the reason. Number 2, they want it for the votes. And number 3, you know what that one is. We don't have to talk about that one.
I guess alluding to the great replacement theory. Some sick and twisted stuff, and Trump's the one who has encouraged Republicans to shoot down border security bills. So not only is he pushing deranged rhetoric on that subject, demonizing people, saying he's going to deport lawful immigrants who are here legally from Springfield, who are Haitian, to Venezuela. Yes, he said that. In one of his California press conferences, I'm going to deport them to Venezuela. What? Why? First of all, why would you deport them if they're here legally? Second of all, why are you deporting them to Venezuela? Double weird. So his rhetoric is deranged. And if we dive into the underlying topic at issue, he also is the one shooting down solutions and not serious about addressing the problems that do exist, which aren't the ones that he fearmongers about. And then finally, this.
And I haven't gotten an apology. I want an apology from ABC.
Well, we'll just keep waiting by the phone for that. That is today's show. Thank you to David for having me back, and thank you all for watching. We will have a beautiful, fantastic, wonderful bonus show, and so do become a member to get that, and have a wonderful weekend if you're not going to join us for the bonus show, and David will be back, from my understanding, on Monday.